All right, gentlemen. Well, now this session is a workshop that's focused on disciple-making movements. And this is something that you have in-house experts with Marcus and Bridget. In fact, I think they're doing Ignite DMM is the training that they do. And so if this piques your interest at all, definitely keep that in mind as you look at learning more. They can certainly help you with that. Now, in my years of missions and evangelism, I often wondered how to go from a spiritually interested person to planting a church. It's a big leap, is how it was. And we'll need to go to session 2, if we can do that. Right afterward? Okay. There we go. Got it. The graphics didn't come through, but that's okay, I think, for this one. All right, so how do we go from a spiritually interested person to planting a church? That's a big leap. The common method is what we would call accretion. You start with one, and then you go through, maybe 1 or 2 years of Bible studies in order to introduce them to the Bible, and then you ask them, okay, would you like to become a follower of Jesus? And there may or may not be a positive answer to that. And if there is a yes, then you go through discipleship, and that could last for a number of years. And so you're talking about, 5 years, and that might not be the person. And then you move on to another person, and eventually you've got a handful of people, and then you can start out with a church. So that's one approach for it, but DMM really accelerated this for me. You get with me, by the way, a person who was involved in missions and evangelism quite heavily. That's the method that I went with. But then what I saw in DMM was something that really moved that along much faster and made it more accessible. It actually closed that gap between an interested person and a church, because it gave me a path to doing this. So I want to introduce to you what the basics are of disciple-making movements, and then we can go through some of the key stories that I have here about disciple-making movements. So here's one of the main things, is that we focus on persons of peace. Now, a person of peace or a man of peace, is defined in Luke chapter 10 and Matthew chapter 10, when Jesus commissions the 70 disciples, and he sends them out 2 by 2 in order to find persons of peace. You can look in the context of each of those, and it really shows who is hospitable and who is spiritually interested. Who's going to pay attention to the message that you're giving? And so that's what he started with, and that's one key point of disciple-making movements. The next key point is use of Shema statements. Real quickly, this comes from Deuteronomy chapter 6, where it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And you shall write these commands on," what does it say? It's the gates of your property, basically, and the doorpost of your house. And so these Shema statements, which the word simply means listen, it's hear, it's that first word of that statement there. These Shema statements identify who's hospitable and who's spiritually interested. Let me tell you how that's done from a Middle Eastern perspective. When we lived there, basically all properties had to have a wall around them. In some places it was legally necessary. I mean, you were required to have a wall of some height. It could be only a couple feet, or it could be like Osama bin Laden's hideout, where it was 12-foot high walls. So these serve, obviously, the sense of protection of defining inside what's yours versus outside what's everybody else's. On that, you would have a gate that would be an entrance to that, and then in between there, you'd have your yard, or hosh is what it's called, and inside is the house. The house is kind of in the middle of it. And you would have something on the outside, is what it's saying when it says the gates of your house in Deuteronomy. That would be a symbol for everyone else looking at your property. A symbol, namely, that you are a follower of God. And then that intermediary space, that's where your family would play. That's where you'd have your family time, is outside the house, right in that area. And so if you had something on the doorpost of your house, it was a reminder to you. Now you might think as well from that context in Deuteronomy chapter 6 that it says to put things on your forehead and on your wrist. Now what's that all about? Well, the forehead, I can't really see my forehead. That's for other people to see. And so that's where the tradition of these Pharisees wearing these phylacteries, these boxes that would be strapped on their head, it was a sign to everybody else, I am a dutiful follower of God. And then what was the thing on the wrist? Well, when I look at my wrist, I see a watch. I'm reminded of the time. And then I also, I usually have like some bracelets here that remind me I'm a follower of Jesus. And so the wrist is a reminder to me. The forehead is a notice for everybody else. What Shema statements do is there's a simple statement that will allow you to feel out whether this person is spiritually interested or hospitable. I'll get into some of these specific examples here. And in fact, you have them, a lot of them printed on your sheet there. I've collected about 30 of them. And you have those to choose from that we'll kind of discuss in a little bit of how you can use those. But let's go through these. Here are a few of them right now. I'll just give you a handful. Could I pray for you right now? I've used this across the counter at Walgreens. And the person said, yeah, you could pray that for my direction. And then I came back in, a few days later to that same Walgreens, and I asked the gentleman, so how is your sense of direction? I asked you a few days ago if I could pray for you, and how's your sense of direction? And he was like, wow, yeah, thank you for asking, and he described it, and immediately there was this connection. But some people will shut it down cold. Can I pray for you right now? No. Okay. And that tells me that person's not spiritually interested, right? But this other gentleman was spiritually interested. And so it helps to feel that out. Somebody might ask, how are you? And I say, I'm better than I deserve. Well, what's that all about? That's about grace. What I deserve is punishment, is hell. I've offended the infinite God. But what I have, what I'm given, is another day of life on this side of the earth. The top side, that is. Every child is a gift from God. This was a valuable one for me in the Middle East when we had 5 kids. And, people would look at our little kids and we would say, they would say, oh, how beautiful. Look what God has done. That's the Arabic phrase. And I would say, yes, and every child is a gift from God. I had one woman that said, thank you, I needed that. Well, there's a spiritually interested person. God is providing everything we need. It's just a constant reminder that, God is there for us. Or this one, I like this one. This is a photo of my wife. She is the second greatest gift God has given me. Whoa, second greatest gift? Are you insulting your wife? My greatest gift is salvation. I love God because he loved me first. So these are some examples of what Shema statements are. They're intended to feel out whether this person is hospitable and spiritually interested. The hospitable part is then you follow up to say, okay, here's a person that's spiritually interested. Would you like to look at this a little bit deeper? So for example, I'm better than I deserve. Well, what's that all about? Well, that's about grace. Would you like to learn more about grace? Yeah, in fact, I would. Okay, that's a person who is hospitable, who's willing to work with you in what we'll call a Discovery Bible Study, which is the next thing here, the use of Discovery Bible Studies. These establish through the Bible that there is the need for a Messiah and that Jesus is the only person in all of history that could be that Messiah. The beginning set is called the Discovering God Studies, and that, again, is right here in the summary of it. In fact, the instructions are right here. These first steps, these 8 steps, are all you need to lead a Bible study. I did this with our kids. When they were growing up, my 5-year-olds when they got to 5 years old, they would be leading the Bible study in our family. We would go through these Discovering God studies and these first 30 passages that are laid out to establish that Jesus is the only person in all of history that could be the Messiah. And my 5-year-old could lead the whole family in a Bible study. My 7 and 8-year-old daughters led their friends. They took it upon themselves to invite their friends to a Discovery Bible study of their own, where they would open their Bible. Their friends would come over to play. All right, let's do a Discovery Bible study. And so they would open this up, they would read the passage, they would go through these questions, and then they would go on to play and do their other things. So they did it of their own accord, just leading their friends in Discovery Bible studies. This is also called the Simple Bible Study Method, but it's the Discovery, the DBS. And here is the example. This, again, is on your papers. But what are you thankful for? Is there anything you're struggling with? This introduces right away that there are all these things that we have to be thankful for from God. If there's something we're struggling with, those are prayer requests that are naturally brought out so that people can then, once they get to that point of talking to God, they have something to specifically bring Him. And then the third step is to read through the passage. So these passages are laid out, starts with Genesis chapter 1, right at the beginning. And then Genesis chapter 2, and then it goes into the fall in chapter 3, that we need a Savior. Moves ahead to, for example, even Leviticus. There's a passage in Leviticus there that shows that the only sacrifice that takes away sins is a blood sacrifice. And Isaiah 53 is another one a little bit later where it shows that Jesus is that perfect sacrifice, that the Messiah was the perfect sacrifice. Number 4, everybody in the group answers the question, what does this teach us about God? So that could be, for example, if one person answers it, and the other person, might feel the same thing. Oh, it teaches me the same. Well, you can't just get away with that. Well, put it into your own words. And what that does is it shows that every passage of Scripture has something to teach us about God. The next question, what does this teach us about people? So not only does it teach us things about God, but we are in relationship to God. And so what are those things that we can learn about people from every text of the Bible? What are you going to do about it? A little bit later, we'll talk about obedience-based discipleship. And this puts it right into that step of action. So the idea here is that you would have something specific that the person could, the rest of the group could ask you about for next week. Did you do what you said you were going to do? You can't get away with something like, I want to try to be a better person. It's not quite specific enough because, how do you measure whether or not you are a better person? However, somebody could, read a passage and say, well, I see that, like we talked about in the first session, God cares for all of us and He provides for us. And so I want to provide a sandwich for a homeless person. I want to give a sandwich to a homeless person. Okay, that's something specific that we can ask you next week. Did you do what you said you were going to do? Likewise, who are you going to tell? Name someone specific. And so these last 2 questions, these are things that the person facilitating the Bible study writes down. Because this is obedience-based discipleship. It gets people in the habit of obeying Scripture. Not just adding more to their mental categories and filling their minds, but rather really obeying, putting this into action, putting it into multiplication as well. That's what Who Are You Going to Tell is all about. So that's a Discovery Bible study. The long and the short of it is a Discovery Bible study. You could put this into a written form where on the left-hand side you can see the questions that we just looked at. COLA is a nice way, and in fact, what I encourage people for your own individual study, you can fold a piece of paper in half and then in half again. And you've got 4 sections, which first of all, you copy the passage. So you just copy it word for word from the Bible. And just going through that alone just helps you to really think in detail about it. And then you put it into your own words. What does that do? That shows that you really understand it. And then you look at lessons. What lessons does this teach you? In other words, what are you going to do about it? And who are you going to tell? And then that's application. Or, I'm sorry, the lessons are what does it teach us about God and what does it teach us about people? And then the last thing is the application. Who are you going to tell? And what are you going to do about it? So that's a COLA written study. And a lot of people leading Discovery Bible studies will do that sort of thing, where they'll have people that prepare that. Now, everybody in their group will prepare this before the meeting. So they just come and they talk it over. Obedience-based discipleship, I mentioned that. It's putting it right into action. That's another key distinctive of Discovery Bible studies or disciple-making movements. Let me share a few of these stories then about my experience. I mentioned a little bit about my own kids being able to lead Bible studies, but we've also been focused on Arabs and Somalis in Minneapolis, and then just open to leading Bible studies with anyone. And we've had different fits and starts that we've gone through, where somebody starts out and after 3 sessions they're kind of like, I don't think I'm interested anymore. Or things, really taken off. Like, for example, this was so interesting. We had this Saudi friend that we just met. I don't know exactly where it was that we met, but he was interested in this Discovery Bible study. And he said, who am I going to tell? Well, I'm going to tell my mother. And so he tells his mother, and his mother was so intrigued by all of this, she said, I'm going with you next time. And so she goes along, and she brings the sister as well. And then the older brother hears about it, and he comes along for session 3. And it just built like this. And so we went through the first 7 sessions, and then the family moved back to Saudi Arabia. On the other hand, they had the Discovery Bible study, and they had a Bible. So they were able to take this with them and continue on their own in Saudi Arabia, something that we couldn't do ourselves. So those are some of the experiences that I started with, but when I was in Orlando, Florida, this is again working for this mission agency, Pioneers, and just going to a traditional church like this. While I was there was a Muslim man and a woman that came to church. And I introduced myself to them, and I was amazed. And I'll call them Aaron and Beth. It's too bad you can't see the picture. The pictures would be nice. I don't know if there's a chance of reloading that or anything, because we got pictures of their baptism and things. But in any case, in 20 years of ministry to Muslims, I had never walked a person across that threshold of praying the prayer, so to speak. It's hard work. It's tough going, working with Muslims. And I'd never had that opportunity of doing that. Now, there are people that I had, a lot of people, I would say about 1,000 people that I had these conversations where my job was to remove stumbling blocks. Somebody has a problem with the Trinity, so I would explain it more clearly, and then they didn't have a problem with the Trinity after that. Somebody has a problem with the Bible and the authority of the Bible, and I would talk to them about that, reason with them, and remove that stumbling block so that then they didn't have that complaint about the Bible, and they were able to take steps closer to faith. And then I had other people that, somebody else had brought these people to faith, and I was able to disciple them. And so I had those people, but I never walked anyone across that threshold myself. I met Aaron and Beth in our traditional church here, and I said plainly, do you understand what you're hearing here? Because I could hear there was some, pretty distinct dialect and speech things, and they were like, oh, we understand very little. And I said, well, how about this? If I get you a Bible in your language, how about we do a Bible study where you can understand it better? You can read in your language, Persian. I didn't know Persian. And I can read in English. And they said, oh, we would love that. And so we start this out, and I have to tell you, Genesis chapter 1, it talks about the creation of all things. And so when Aaron was asked, so what are you going to do about this? He said, I see that God made everything, even the little ants, and so I don't want to harm any of his creation. Again, it kind of violates the specific rule, but I was like, okay, we'll see how that goes. The next week, his wife, Beth, said, oh, you have to ask him what he did. And I said, well, how did that go? Did you do what you said you were going to do? He said, Well, I got up on Tuesday night about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I went to the bathroom and I saw this big, long cockroach in the bathtub. And I took off my sandal and I was about ready to kill it. And I thought, wait a minute, I promised God I wouldn't hurt any of his creatures. And so he went into the kitchen, he got a plastic bag and he kind of scooted that little cockroach into the plastic bag and took it outside and set it free. See, one cockroach saved by a Discovery Bible study. But he did what he said he was going to do. And both of them told the people they said they were going to tell. And so, for example, he told his friend, another Persian man who was a professor at a university in Germany. And his friend said, hey, when David and Cheryl lead you in the Bible study, would you do that for me each week? And so it became a weekly thing. And then Beth likewise told her friend, her cousin, I think it was, that was in the United Kingdom. And so she was leading a Bible study in the United Kingdom. And so we would lead a Bible study, and it got to a point where we would lead one Bible study, and they would lead 7 Bible studies. They were seeking asylum here in the United States because of some of the torture that he had received. He was basically on the wrong side of the revolution when the Shah when the Shah was deposed and the Ayatollah took control in 1979. Their families were on the wrong side of that revolution, and numerous people in their families were put to death by firing squad or just disappeared off the face of the earth. And he himself he did his compulsory military service, and he had one of the superiors pull him aside and apologize to him and say, hey, we were told to make life miserable for you. That's because of their family, their connections. They were more on the side of the friendly side of the United States rather than the strong Muslim connection of the Ayatollah. And so they received a lot of persecution because of this. But they got to the point when we reached Isaiah chapter 53. Before we read through that passage, I said to them, now it's important that you recognize that this was written 700 years before Jesus was born. Other people had been talking to them about Jesus at church and whatever. And this was written 700 years before Jesus was born. And they're like, okay. And so he reads this through. Aaron is reading this through aloud to his wife at the time. And he stopped right in the middle and he said, this is the story of Jesus. And she said, but it was written 700 years before Jesus was born. And that was the thing that showed them that only God could control 700 years of history like that, to be that accurately fulfilled in the life of Jesus. And it was because of Isaiah 53 that they made the decision to follow Jesus that day. So we had these baptisms. I say baptisms plural because you can see them. We had their baptism, but also they had been leading these Bible studies of other people. And one of their cousins had come to the United States. She was a professor in the university in Tehran. And she came to the United States on a visit, on a tourist visa. And in her 2 weeks that she was there, she said, one thing I absolutely want to do is be baptized because I want to know what this is all about. And she was one of the first believers that was over there. And so we had the opportunity to baptize her. She went back and she baptized all those other people that had made the profession of faith up to this point. At first, it was 2 or 3. And then it was 9. And then we heard it was 16. And then it was 25. And then it was 33. And then it was 60. And actually, I want to back up because it was about the time that it was 12 or 15, somewhere in there. Aaron's sister downloaded the whole Bible from the internet and printed it out on her home printer. The whole Bible, because she wanted to have this to be able to lead the Bible studies for other people. And of course, she didn't recognize this, but the government could see that she downloaded the whole Bible. So they literally broke down the door, confiscated the Bible, ransacked the whole house, beat her father so badly that he couldn't walk for the next month. And so that's the sort of persecution that they dealt with, even from the very beginning. But yet this multiplication, it just kept going. When each of them was made to sign a statement saying that they would not study the Bible, what was the thing that they wanted to do? They wanted to study the Bible. Why was the government so interested in keeping them away from this message? And that was the very thing that they wanted to do. And so then there was this explosion of new believers. I mentioned up to 60. When it got to about 60, they realized, wait a minute, this is far too big for one group. So we're splitting into two groups that will do the same passages, do the exact same questions, and move along at the same pace, but in two groups. And so it was about 30 and 30. And as it happened, there was a school bus, not exactly a school bus, but a school bus that was parked outside of the building, and sure enough, about 20 or 30 secret police came and arrested 19 of these believers at one time that were gathering on this Thursday night for this Bible study. And they kept them for 4 weeks and kept them imprisoned for 4 weeks. And one woman they kept for 6 weeks. That was the woman that we had baptized. Because when she went back, she used her lectern at the university as a pulpit. She shared with everyone how she became a believer, how she began to follow Jesus, how she was baptized. She was summarily dismissed from her job, but then they began tracking her. And that's how they discovered this, the meeting of, it was supposed to be 30 people, but they arrested them before everybody had arrived. And so it was 19 people that were arrested and tortured, as you can imagine. It was a difficult thing to hear, some of the stories that were coming back. But really, that shut down a lot of the open communication that had happened. We weren't able to follow it so accurately or so closely. Aaron and Beth were not able to lead the Bible studies anymore. But the seeds were planted, and they continued to grow in an amazing way. They had these documents that of how to lead the Bible studies and which passages to read through. They had gotten to the point where they even took it upon themselves to say, all right, somebody else comes into this that's interested. We have to start them right at the beginning, because the very thing that persuaded us was starting from the very beginning when God created everything. So we need them to understand that and walk them through this thing. And so suddenly it became, the next report we had was it was hundreds of people. And the last report we had was about 2.5 years ago. And it was 550 people meeting in 50 different groups in and around Tehran. After they had been arrested and they were released, again, they wanted to study the Bible. And that's the very thing that spurred this on. It's painful, but we can say, thank you to the Iranian government for the persecution, because that's the thing that drove this forward. Everyone wanted to know why the government was covering this thing up. And so 50 different groups, they recognized, we can't meet all together like this. We have to meet no more than 10 people at a time. And so they made some of those changes. They never wrote down or never even texted or communicated electronically where they were meeting or when they were meeting. They varied their meeting places so that they could meet secretly. They only communicated verbally where the next meeting would be and when it would be, so that they avoided any of these things. Well, that was 2.5 years ago, and this group was doubling about every 3 to 4 months. So we can surmise that this is thousands at this point who had this DNA of a disciple-making movement, the understanding, we have to do it exactly the same because this is the thing that persuaded us. So when making DMM their own, they started these new groups and continued to move it forward in that way. I wish you could see the celebratory pictures of, Aaron, for example, throwing up his arms in celebration when he came out of the water and he was baptized. And seeing, his wife as well, and just them together as a family. They're still in Orlando, and they're still helping us. They're still working with our organization, Professionals Global. So we keep in close contact with them. Well, I do have some questions for us to take some time to discuss. And what I want you to do is to, just in groups there in your tables, just go through these questions. What is it in DMM that might attract you? Is there anything that you've heard even today that's like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. I like that. Is there anything that you struggle with in DMM, in what you've heard today? And then this is a practical thing. Off of the papers that you have there, pick 2 of these Shema statements that you will use. So something that you could find yourself, and I find that maybe 2 or 3 is about the most that I regularly use. I used to actually pull out this sheet before I would go into Walmart, before I would go into Walgreens, and I would read through and I would pick, 1 or 2, and I would be going in asking the Lord, okay, who is it that you want me to tell this to? And I would spread that seed, trying to find who that person of peace is. Then write down what you will do about it and whom you will tell. Is there somebody else that you can think of that needs to hear this message? That you've kind of thought about this, and maybe they need to be encountered with this as well. And then when will you do that? So that you're putting it on paper. I'm going to do this by this time. All right, gentlemen over here, you might want to join this group, and then I think we've got an even, or you could join the 3 back there, either one, and then we've got a decent group, and take just a few minutes and talk through these questions here. So I'm interested to hear, what are some of the Shema statements that you found particularly interesting that you find you might use? And we'll just take 1 or 2 minutes here before the break to talk about these. Did you find people would think about? Yeah. Could I pray for you right now is probably one of the most versatile ones that can be used in restaurants or wherever you are. I mean, just with your friends as well. We have to keep that in mind, that we're building a relationship with them and connecting with them, but that is a very versatile one to have close on your lips.
And the right now is important. I want prayer that they can hear it as well.
Right. Can I pray for you right now? Not just, can I pray for you at some nebulous point in the future, but right now. It's very good.
Our group is meeting next week. Can we pray for you on that day? Put you on our prayer list?
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. Yeah. Other ones that you found good? That you found useful?
What I like is may God bless you and not religious or Christian. Just spreading that.
Yeah. Yeah, just committing blessing to people. And this is not, especially if it's people from other cultures, this is not something strange or weird to them. It's in a lot of the phrases that they have. So, for example, Romanian, the way that you say hello is pace. It's peace. Obviously, we know that from shalom in Hebrew or salam in Arabic. It's not a strange sort of thing. It's something that people readily welcome. Yeah, I'll take a blessing. Can I? Just may the Lord bless you and your family. Yeah. Others? Yes?
To that same, gives you an opportunity to get some feedback.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Bruce. So it's, have a blessed day, or just having this as a greeting, maybe on an email message. I put it on my voicemail, and I have had so many people that, even, computer places or something, someone calls me and says, and they leave a voice message and say, and may God bless you as well. And so they're thinking about that. They're thinking about where that blessing is coming from. And here's the key with all of these is, you're putting it out there. This is your gate, your sign on the gate. It's saying, I am a spiritual person. And so when things come crashing in, like coronavirus, for example, where are people going to turn to with the questions that they have? Well, there's this guy who always ends his things in, blessings, or there's somebody who says, may God bless you and your family. How is this a blessing? And they're going to bring that question to you as an individual. You're putting that marker out there that you are a spiritual person. Anything from this table? Just one last one before we have a break here. Wow, that's great. That's great. So, yeah, just asking servers at restaurants, can I pray for you? And then even seeing servers sit down and pray with them at that time. But again, only very few people will say, no thanks, I'm good. It really is something that appeals to people. All right, we'll see you all in, I guess you've got other breakout sessions in about 5 or 7 minutes or so.